Hi, everyone. Welcome to my channel. My name's Lisa. I'm a leadership coach and a human potential geek. I really focus on getting more women into the C-suite to bring lasting business and social change. I coach women and others early in their leadership careers to prepare them to be the impactful leaders that our world sorely needs. So if that interests you, please make sure that you subscribe to my channel, that you hit the notification bell so you know when I've posted a new video, and like this video if you're into that so you don't miss it. I'm here today with three-time Olympian and kick-ass woman, Miranda Ayim. And I just want to thank you, Miranda, so much for being with me today and for agreeing to this interview.
Oh, thanks, Lisa. I'm so excited to be here and excited to get down to the nitty-gritty and chat about some fun topics.
Yay. Good, good. So if you can just share with us, first of all, a bit of an overview of your career and kind of what has brought you to where you are now, because I don't know if everyone watching this will know what you're up to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like you said, I am a three-time Olympian with Team Canada. I'm originally from London, Ontario. For those who are watching, they can see a little homage to London behind me on the poster. So that's my hometown, but I actually spent the past 15 years quite far from London. I grew up playing all sorts of sports, eventually kind of honed in on basketball as a key opportunity for me. So developed my skills in that area. Worked with the kind of developmental levels of Canada basketball from the age of 13 until just recently. And then eventually ended up getting a scholarship down to Pepperdine University in California, where I earned a degree in public relations and psychology. And I enjoyed my time there, loved it. It's hard to not love Southern California. But after I graduated, I made the decision to go pro. That took me over to Turkey for 3 years, bounced around to a few different cities there. And then I spent the last 8 years of my pro career in France, mainly in southern France, specifically southwest, just outside of Bordeaux, which is the other homage behind me on the poster. So we have a little bit of both worlds. And I've been playing with Team Canada throughout that entire period. So I had the honor of playing in 3 Olympics. So my first was London 2012, then Rio 2016, and most recently Tokyo 2020, which we all know was a little bit delayed and actually took place in 2021. And had the immense honor of bearing the flag for Team Canada and the opening ceremonies there as well, which was just an incredible, incredible experience. And I announced after that Olympics that I was actually stepping back and retiring from sports. So now I'm in a transition period. I'm back in London, moved back from France, and now working in the coaching world, working with individuals and teams to eventually take their game to the next level, so to speak. And I didn't mean to put the pun in there, but once an athlete, always an athlete, I guess. But yeah, just supporting individuals trying to reach their potential in that area. And I love how you mentioned that you are a human potential geek. Is that it?
Yes. Yeah. Because I've just always gotten so jazzed about helping people really reach their potential. So yeah, it's in the blood for sure. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That completely resonates with me. So that's what I do on a day-to-day basis, whether coaching, podcasting, or doing public speaking engagements. I love it, engaging and supporting people in those ways.
Nice. Very nice. So what do you see as the connection between the sporting world and the business world? Because they're very different, but I think there are some really significant connections.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like even just now, I mentioned kind of leveling up your game or whatever. There's so many analogies that we use in the business world that are drawn directly from the sporting world. Like I know I work with RBC as well, and we have huddles, team huddles, directly drawn from the sporting world, but just these elements of high performance team dynamics, trying to get the best out of yourself and your colleagues, and if you have people working for you for your employees, that leadership aspect as well. It's the exact same. Teams are teams. We're trying to work together as individuals and collectively, and I think that translates from the sport world to the business world quite fluidly.
So one of the things I know about you is that you also captained a team to win gold at the Pan Am Games. And you've had so much success in your athletics career, but you talk a lot about failure. So, why is that? And what can you tell us?
Yeah, I love talking about the things that sometimes we inherently, and myself inherently, want to avoid, just to save face, because it's a kind of an uncomfortable space to be in. But I've found also in my career and my life that it's really those difficult moments, those intense emotions, those failures that connect us, that bring us together more than any victory or good time ever could. It's those similarities, and speaking on those experiences, especially in the world like high performance, where we're always focused on the end goal. We're all like goal setting, get the trophy, win the championship, have the highest, points. And there is merit to those as kind of like direction setting, you're aiming for something. But the process is where we spend most of our time. And if we're not graceful with ourselves in that process, and understanding that what happens and when we misstep, it has happened to everybody else who has gone along that path, it can be really tough. So I do like to share those moments of failure and self-doubt or whatever it may be, with people who may be or may be in the future in similar situations.
Can you tell us a story?
Ooh, there's too many to count. and still every day, you have flashes of either failure or just like, Miranda, what are you doing here? Like, Oh, I can even give an example of this morning. I had a radio interview about a project, a mentorship project that's coming up, with a completely different, it's not my organization, but with another organization. And I just felt like I sounded like an idiot, when like just the words don't come together and you're not communicating yourself or expressing yourself as smoothly as you want. And just having some of the skills in the moment, being able to kind of like breathe and slow it down, because we kind of start to quicken the pace in those situations. But even after the fact, not dwelling the entire day on that, being like, okay, it wasn't my best interview. It was passable. We talked about the points that we needed to talk about. I probably sounded better than I thought I did in my mind. That's usually always the case. People aren't hearing the steady stream of doubt in your mind. And then just living with it and taking the lessons from it, for the next time.
Yeah. I was telling you just before we hit record here that at one point I did one of these interviews and I recorded the entire thing with no video of myself. It got the audio, it didn't pick up the video of myself. It just had the person I was speaking with. And I had to record my side completely all over again. But you know what? It worked out. It was fine, but he just I knew I wasn't quite in the right headspace to begin with. And it just opened up that momentary possibility of a mistake. But I think, you're talking about sort of, you do the best with what shows up that day, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. So, you've obviously gotten exceptionally good at performing under pressure. And you even just talked about it there. It's like, I know to breathe. I know, okay, this isn't going as well, but you resource things, right? You knew to breathe. You knew to say, okay, well, but it probably isn't as bad as it feels to me, because I've got the doubt and the inner critic there. So I'm curious about that skill that obviously to perform at the level you've performed at, you've had to really hone over time. I'm really curious, where did that story begin for you?
Ooh, that's a good question, because in this sphere of kind of mental performance is usually what we how we refer to it in sports,
Mhm.
and outside as well. I first stumbled upon that, like many others, like when I had to, when I was full frontaled with a situation that I wasn't equipped to handle. And it was in my second year overseas. I was playing in Istanbul, Turkey, which was an incredible experience off the court. Just a wonderful city, culture, food, everything. I loved it. But on the court, it was my worst season ever, for a variety of reasons. The main one was because I got quite seriously injured. I've been blessed throughout my career. I really haven't had to deal with any major injuries, just like the nicks and bruises and, annoying aches. But that one, I did end up with a herniated disc. But
Mm.
I didn't realize that I had it at that time. Just took a really hard hit in practice and was like, oh, why do I have shooting pains down my leg? And why can't I sit or stand or sleep without pain? Or,
Yeah.
going just a naive, I think I was 22 at the time, didn't speak the language, didn't have really a lot of resources to figure things out. So just kind of grinned and bear it, like athletes tend to do, just rub some dirt in it.
Mhm.
um, which isn't an effective coping mechanism for those listening. Um, but as I was going through that, I was still trying to perform at a high level. And then there was this disconnect between my mind and my body. Obviously, my body was like, whoa, whoa. And my mind was like, why can't I do this? Why can't I perform? What's wrong with you? Are you not a good enough athlete?
Mm.
So there was a few different things going on, and even as my as my body started to heal, somehow, I don't know how it did under those circumstances, started to get back to a place of normalcy, my mind was still like, okay, kind of like PTSD for like injuries in the athletes, at a different level. So I was just overthinking everything, and I hadn't been in that place in my life to that extent. So then I went through this long journey of exploring my thoughts and, how those are tied into our emotions and how that ties into, like, on a practical level, like what I can do with my hands, based on what's going on in my mind. So that was my first introduction to the world of mental performance and how powerful our minds are and how powerful what we say to ourselves is.
Mm. Mhm. Wow. And so what was your biggest sort of takeaway from that experience? Because that's profound and at a pretty young age too.
Yeah, yeah. And it took many years to work through that. And I'm probably still working through that. But there's a Carl Jung quote that is, yeah, I hope I can remember it correctly. Until you make the unconscious conscious, you'll call it fate and it will direct your life, or it will direct your life
Mm.
and you will call it fate. And I feel like at that point in my life, everything was like unconscious, like it was in the subconscious realm. I was just moseying along. And the biggest lesson I took from there is like, like shed some light on what's going on, take a good look at your internal dialogue. And yeah, just implementing a reflective process, and then
Mhm.
implementing kind of like what you mentioned, some of those techniques like breathing, learning exactly how to regulate my emotions so that I can be in a better state. So both the preparatory work, that includes the reflection, but also the in the moment work of how to regulate myself in those instances.
Mhm. Mhm. It's interesting because I'm reading um, Emotional Agility by Susan David right now.
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
so good. But
Mhm.
that noticing, it's funny how often that noticing, it's the first thing. And yet, how often do we try not to notice? And you were probably with the injury, you were probably in that place of trying not to notice the pain, trying not to notice that you're sleep deprived, trying not to notice. And momentarily, sometimes those things are effective, but you know, you read Susan's research, it's like pretty crippling in the long run. So learning to notice is already such a big skill.
Yeah, it's quite revolutionary. And I love how you said sometimes we kind of like we try to avoid noticing. And I find that so often in especially this day and age, but people say that so often. So I shouldn't say this day and age. I think it's been forever, trying to avoid uncomfortable feelings or uncomfortable situations allows us to avoid approaching those, a deeper understanding of like who we are, for sure, our weaknesses, but also our strengths that we can draw on in those kind of situations as well. So facing that head on, I think is really empowering.
So you mentioned, like as you were noticing this pain and everything, those voices coming up, like what's wrong with you, maybe you're not as a good enough athlete, that sort of thing. And a lot of my clients have struggled to get ahead in leadership, certainly partly because of external bias, but also because of that lack of confidence or unrealistic comparisons that they make of themselves with others, or perfectionism that gets them really kind of like frozen in place and not being able to move forward with taking a little bit of risk and that sort of thing. And I've really come to see that as internalized gender bias and internalized biases. So, can you say more about what ways that you've experienced those things? Because I know you have, and just, share a little bit of that.
Yeah, no, that's such a powerful statement or line of thought, because I always come back to kind of trying to live my life around the controllables, what's in my realm of control. And what is in my realm of control is what's going on inside. Okay, not everything, emotions come and go, but how I react to them is within my control. So my exploration starts there. And you mentioned kind of the risk that comes with putting yourself out there, especially when you're in a role of leadership or, managing people or a new position that you're not familiar with. There's inherent risk in that. Yeah, we can fall flat on our face. But in that risk, in that uncertainty, there's the greatest opportunity for anything, really. Limitless possibility. And if I relate that to my life on the court, on the basketball court, there's an inherent risk of failure in everything that I do as soon as I step on the court. If you think of a simple like shooting the basketball, the motion is more or less the same. But if you deviate to like 1 centimeter to the right or 1 centimeter to the left, it's going to hit the rim and it'll probably bounce out. There's such a wide margin of error that when you step on the court, you have to assume the risk of failure. And in assuming that, you then release freedom and creativity in order to really play to the level that you want. And I think that's a lot easier saying it than it is doing it. And I know that, but I know also what it feels like to be in that flow state. Whether I was on the court and, just in the moment, not thinking about anything else, not doubting, just doing what I was trained to do. Because we already know, we know what to do most of the time. We've reached the level that we are at because we're capable of doing it and other people recognize that. So like giving us the license of just ourselves, the license of just like, go for it. You know what to do. You have the skills, you have the capability. And then just doing that. And that relates to whatever activity that is in front of us.
Okay. I love that. Assume the risk of failure.
Yeah.
Sometimes as I'm doing these interviews, I'm like, that should be a t-shirt. Like there's just, but it's not just get comfortable with it, right? It's like, take it on,
Mhm.
And there's just assume the risk is, it just has so much of a different connotation to it. I really love that.
Yeah,
I think I'm probably
it's
going to.
maybe, yeah, it's maybe a little bit even more empowering, because usually they say get comfortable with failure, and it's like, okay, like, all right, I'll leave it there, it can sit beside me. But assuming it is like, okay, we're going towards it, as
Yeah,
an aim, we can do this kind of vibe.
yeah,
Hmm.
for sure, for sure. So have you ever put your all into something and just had it fall flat completely?
Yes. That is, yes is the short answer. The first thing that comes to mind, and it's something I'm actually honestly still working through, is my most recent Olympics experience with this team. Um, we had an incredible team. Now I'm retired. I'm recently retired after that last Olympics. I think I mentioned that. Um, but we were going into this Olympics ranked number 4 in the world. So that's an incredible ranking for our team, and one we've held for a few years now. And that positions us we're in a position to potentially medal. So going into the Olympics, we were expected to medal or perform very well, both ourselves, like in our internal organization, and externally. And we were voicing those goals. Like when I was giving interviews, I was assuming the risk of failure by saying, hey, we want to medal.
Yeah.
We expect this, we have the skill to do it, and we want to do it. For your listeners who follow the Olympics or our team, we did not medal. So that was a huge disappointment, failure as far as outcomes. And there's many tactical and strategy kind of reflections and analysis that we can do with, plus the whole layer of competing in a COVID environment and not being together collectively as a team until a few days ahead of the Olympics, the tournament itself.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's the most recent example of like just falling flat on your face in a very public manner, and coming back and knowing, hey, not only did I let my team down, myself down, my support system down, but like the entire country down, really, you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
And I think for me, at least, part of my process in unpacking that was leaning on my support system. I came home, and, we don't often see the post games. We don't follow the athletes post games. We would just see like the people who have won the medals, and we're like, hurrah. And then, you have the little photo op, et cetera, et cetera. And I did some of those without the medal, obviously, but for the majority of athletes, if you think about the number of athletes that go and the number that medal, the majority of athletes actually didn't reach their objective.
Mm.
So the majority of us are home kind of licking our wounds. I spent the first week, I crashed at my parents' house. I had a place in London, but I spent the first week with my parents' house, just kind of like taking it
Yeah.
easy, like physically, mentally taking it in, crying off and on. You know how it is. I'm not a crier, but that, it was a bit of an emotional experience, especially the end of my career
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
well, where you feel like you close the chapter, or you close the book on your legacy in the manner that I didn't want to. But kind of accepting that situation, like that is what was meant to happen. I can't change the outcome now. I did everything that I could to that point, and this is finally coming back to your question. And this is really how I get through whatever success or failure is, knowing that I can be proud of how I was in those moments and who I was in those moments. The what is less important to me, the what being the final result. If I can be proud of how I held myself and represented myself and how I treated those around me, and my effort level, I think that's a truly successful life and a truly successful outcome. So that that allows the external result or outcome to be less painful.
It's so you talked about oh shoot, lost my train of thought there for a second.
I talked about quite a few different things.
You did, and it
so
was great. It
was
so, you know, a lot of people who follow me know that I just hate that whole like suck it up mentality, right? Suck it up, move forward, da 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 da, right? And I think what you've really highlighted there is something that is beautiful, right? You, for one, you talked about the fact that you focus on what you can control, and you can't always control the outcome or the result. And so you do as much as you can to set yourself up for success and to make sure you're set up for success. But in the end, the actual result isn't necessarily within your control. It's usually within your influence only. And then there are aspects that you have zero control over, like the other team, like the venue, like, you know, so many other things. But so that was one thing that really struck me. And the other piece was that you took time and you stayed at your parents and you licked your wounds. And I think that is something that is just not a part of that suck it up mentality, kind of what I call the macho performance kind of thing. It's like performance includes going, wow, this feels really shitty. And being able to feel it and being able to show yourself some self-compassion. And then to say, okay, now it's time to leave my parents' house and to, you know, and to move forward with what's next, right? And there is a time when that's really important. So it's not wallowing and staying in it, but you really, like, that's key.
Right? Oh,
Right?
I love how you said performance includes. It is part of the process. It's not outside of the process. And again, the point that you touched on, it's not about wallowing. There is a time for everything, and that was the time for that. And the emotional agility, the book that you mentioned earlier, being emotionally agile means that you're able to experience that moment and then pivot. The pivot is the next step, which is equally important. And part of that, and as well as all the preparatory work to really set you up for success, or as successful as you can be within your control before that. And it's just a whole package deal, but sometimes we tend to kind of separate them out or just look at the fancy, shiny parts of it.
Yeah. So the other thing I want to do, just for the sake of the people who might be watching this, is to acknowledge that this works on a macro level and a micro level, right? So when you're talking about things that most of us can't even fathom ever experiencing, right? But the same steps and sort of process apply to someone who has a really hard time sharing their ideas in a meeting because they're worried that they're not going to be accepted or seen as tuned in or whatever that is. And that the same, you do the prep, you do your best to make sure you're as tuned in as you can be without, you know, being too perfectionistic about it. But then, you know, you only control what you control, and you assume the risk of failure. And then, you know, there might be well, that was kind of rough, and a moment of licking your wounds and that kind of thing. Same with putting your name forward for a promotion, or, you know, any of those kinds of things, right? There are definitely these same things on a smaller scale.
Yes, absolutely. And I think whether they're large or small, and I'll put those in quotations, large or small events in our mind, it's really about breaking down the process of that kind of whatever the obstacle that is blocking you or making you a little bit fearful. You talked about even like posing questions in a meeting. You do the prep work. Okay, what are some questions I can ask, or whatever the preparation is that needs to be done. But sometimes we forget about the prep work in the moment, where we're on the verge of asking the question, okay, what do I need to tell myself, or what body position do I need to be in that moment to make me more likely to present that? Exploring all of those environmental cues, and we do that on the core, and I've done that in my life as well, that again set me up for success. I love that term because it's all the habits, routines, skills, mindsets all coming into play to put us into those opportunities in those spaces where we can excel, and then leave the rest up to the other person. But usually when we've done all that work, it turns out pretty good. Not perfect, it never does, but pretty good.
Fantastic. Yeah, I totally agreed. I mean, so often we can get into that black or white thinking where it's like, it's either going to be this or it's going to be that. But often, even if it doesn't turn out, as wonderful and shiny as you had hoped, it still lands somewhere in the middle where it's actually still was worth doing.
Yeah, 100%, 100%.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. So I have a time machine. Ooh. And I figured out the back in time thing, because I know forward in time is a little easier, but I figured out the back in time. So you can either go back and do over something that you tried really hard to accomplish the first time, but you get to go back now with all the knowledge and experience you have right now. Okay. Or you can go back and have a mentoring discussion with your younger self at any point. I want to know which you would do, but also what would the do-over or the discussion be?
Oh, that's a unique way of viewing that. I'm going to go with the second option. I would have a mentoring discussion with myself. And the reason is this: because I am the person who I am today because of all the failures and mistakes that I've made. The lessons I've learned are a result of that. So I wouldn't want to rob myself of those experiences. And in mentoring, the young me may or may not take my advice and will probably still, have some of those hiccups along the way, but good. I don't want to make the path completely smooth. I don't think that's a realistic view of life, and it's a little bit less enjoyable. It's a little bit less adventurous. And again, I think those are character building experiences. So I would love to give some of that information and, that support and maybe insight or some of those skills to be able to better deal with those situations. That is really helpful, but still allowing that space for, okay, a few failures along the way so that we can build that resiliency and character.
Yeah, totally agree with you. Actually, there's no right or wrong answer to that, but I'm like, yeah, that's what I would do as well. Some of my greatest mistakes have brought the most wonderful things to me. So yeah. So what would the conversation like? So first of all, when would you go back to, and what would you talk about with your younger self?
I'd likely go back to my first year overseas. So I would have been 21 around that time. Just because it was the first time I was really far away from my support system. I already was when I went down to California, because that's the other side of the country, in a different country. But you're still in the university atmosphere, so you do have a good amount of support. Going over to Turkey, a completely different culture, and Pro sports is a completely different world. It can be cutthroat. You don't know what to expect. You don't know, like, they be paying me under the table? Is that like, is this a legal thing to do? Or, this, that, and the other. So having a mentor there at that time would be really helpful. I think something you mentioned earlier about leaning on your supports, I would tell myself to ask the follow-up question. Don't be afraid to ask the question to begin with. But it's often the follow-up question I've found in my life that really is quite revelatory. And that we just kind of like, we take the first answer and we're like, and then we try to like figure out the rest without sounding stupid. At least that's what I do. But my mantra these days is really ask the follow-up question. It shows interest, so that the other party is like, oh, this person's like actually engaged and interested in this. But then you also get more information. So I find that so helpful. And then the support piece, like reaching out to people want to help you. And I'm assuming that your audience is probably in this realm, kind of like ambitious, type A, perfectionist. That I assume that mantle myself. I know I am naturally like that as well. And so we do want to like hold that, keep the final, like the drafts until it's like that final perfect copy, and then we present it to the world. So I would encourage myself just to be like, talk in draft sometime, share what you're working on, connect with people, brainstorm. Don't be afraid to look stupid. That's my big thing. Don't be afraid to look stupid. And I'm still learning that lesson right now, I will tell you, but I would hopefully at that point give myself, like a 15-year advance, at least be able to work on it a little bit more earlier.
Fantastic. Such good advice and really great perspective. So those are all the questions that I have for you. Is there anything you wanted to talk about that I haven't asked you about?
Well, you did mention earlier just the comparison piece. And I'll bring that up just because I know it's a stumbling block for a lot of us, and I know it has been for me. And often when I talk to young athletes and they ask what the one piece of advice would be, and it depends on the day, maybe I'll rotate my advice, but a lot of times I will say, don't compare yourself to the other athletes around you, because they don't have the skills that you have. Both like physical skills in the basketball world, but also what you bring to the team. People don't bring you onto the team just solely based on skill, especially when you get to the highest level. Everybody's really skilled. There's other things that are valuable about you that you bring to the team that is your strength, that is uniquely your strength. And if you're caught up focusing on what other people are doing, you will not be able to fulfill that portion or potential of yourself. So assuming your skills and your strengths and using that as a value asset. And especially I find, and you said you work mainly with females at the beginning of their career, I find we have a tendency even more to compare ourselves with our female counterparts. And like, there's room for everybody. That's the refrain that we always say, like, they're doing what they're doing. Good on them. You can do what you're doing and be successful as well. This is not a competition here. And that's from a professional competitor. It's not a competition. We can all work together, and you work on your strengths and you'll be successful in what you're doing.
That's, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's being your own unique, valuable self and being the best of you, rather than trying to be what someone else has defined, or what you think is someone else's experience or skills, right? It's because I think too, even more broadly than sports and that sort of thing, I mean, there's so much comparison online, and that I see the odd post on LinkedIn where actually someone says, my life is pretty much a shit show. But that's pretty rare.
Yeah.
Most
Yeah.
people are posting about how fabulous they are. And so really it's, you're not getting the full story. And I think the other piece of that is we have the experience ourselves of, like you talked about, of the doubt in your own head, right? And being aware of that doubt. Whereas what you see from somebody else, you're not hearing that inner monologue of, oh my God, did that sound stupid, or any of those kinds of things. And so it's comparing apples and oranges in that way, right?
100%, 100%. And
Yeah.
to take that one step further in the comparison piece is, and this is something I repeat to myself as well, especially in this transition period when I'm in a completely different world. And I always say, don't compare your chapter 1 to someone else's final chapter or their chapter 30 or whatever chapter they're on. Like, they've had a lot more time to write their book. And, people are potentially looking at me and being like, oh, her final chapter is incredible. And, like, we're all at different points, and that comparison is just kind of a no-win game. So I love that, trying to even not guess, but keep in mind that behind the veneer, there are that internal dialogue on the other side of the person as well. And I think that increases empathy as well, and just, shared understanding of where we're at.
Totally. The chapter, your chapter 1 to somebody else's final chapter, and the transition that you're going through right now is a really interesting, again, sort of, there's an analogy here, because I think that sometimes when people move from being an individual contributor, let's say, into being a leader, they're used to being the superstar individual contributor. And then they move into leadership, and it's like they want to be the superstar leader, but you have to be a good enough leader before you can possibly be a superstar, right? That, like, you move to a different book. So you're back at chapter 1.
Yes.
Or maybe chapter 2 or 3 if you've had some other education or experiences that apply, right? But you're not going to be the same as what the predecessor was necessarily, or the way your boss leads, or other great leaders that you've seen, because you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to be, because you're learning, you're going to be faltering and feeling doubt and all of those things. But when you're aware that you're moving from a final chapter in one role into a chapter 1 in another role, then you kind of have a little bit more self-compassion for that, those wobbles, as I like to call them. There are lots of wobbles.
That's the perfect word, wobbles. I like it a lot.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Miranda. I knew it was going to be a great conversation, but I just appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was so wonderful talking with you.
Thanks. All right, and that is all for today. If you found this interview helpful, make sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on future uploads. And please leave a comment letting us know what your wobbles maybe have been and how you've addressed them. Also, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. If you have questions for Miranda, I'm happy to field them and follow up with Miranda, because I'm sure she'd be happy to answer any questions. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you soon. Bye.